really keeping their deficits in check. But they were getting these cheap loans, they were allowed to get cheap borrowing because they had the implied guarantee of the stronger countries due to the euro. Of course, the financial crisis showed that some member states had structural problems when it came to their economy. And this is precisely the reason why when dealing with budgets, you need to have the long-term view in mind when you decide whether to increase spending or reduce spending. And I think the main questions that investors and foreign markets are asking out of countries at this point is this: is your economy viable in the long term? I don't think anybody cares so much whether you're going to have a high deficit in 2010. The main question is your economy viable within the next 2 or 3 years, in the long term, in 5 years, in 10 years? Because companies, rather than credible companies that want to invest in a particular country, they want to do it over the long run, not in the short term. If they want to invest in the short term, it usually means that there is something strange or suspicious about their attempt. Therefore, I think what legislators should look out for is long-term sustainability. And I think this is precisely what my committee is striving to get throughout the discussion of the budget, and we'll be voting in the end of December.
Another question from the floor?
Dominic Connor, P&D. You've spoken about corporate tax rates, and in the short term, that's a relatively easy one. But one of the reactions we're seeing from Ireland is that skilled Irish people, of which there are quite a lot, have looked at the huge debt burden and the low level of services that they're going to get for very high taxes, and are seriously looking at leaving. Now, we hope unemployment in Europe drifts down, we are going to actually see competition for skilled people. One of the speakers there spoke of the fact that they needed highly talented, highly skilled people. Now, London is, I believe, France's 5th biggest city. There are enough expats in here that they actually have French political rallies here to drum up votes. How do you see that evolving, the competition for skills in the world where Chinese employment costs, in some cases, are actually higher than European costs for certain specialist skills? We do now have a global workforce. How are countries going to compete for that?
I think I've got a business that trades pretty much all over the world, and I think that there are, from time to time, each country experiences what we call the war on talent, where highly skilled individuals become a shortage in supply. But actually, that typically happens in very specific and niche markets. I would certainly say over the next 3 to 5 years, I would not expect to see an overall competition in terms of workforce. I think most of the countries that I operate in, I'm certainly finding that labour is available unless you are looking at highly niche market areas, because most economies around the world have actually retracted and therefore have laid off a number of people. And I don't certainly experience any of the businesses that I'm directly involved with are experiencing that. I think the key issue, or the interesting point for me right now from an economic perspective, is the impact of online trading. When I look at businesses across the board, the amount of business being generated online today, if the online sector was an industry, it would be the largest single industry in this country. If you look at Britain today, Britain would be a net exporter when you looked at online transactions. And I think from an economic perspective, the growth and stimulation I'm seeing with businesses today who are trading online is having a far greater impact to businesses than I've ever seen in my history. I think right now that actually, for me, is probably the single biggest catalyst for growth. Just looking at every business that you have that either has a website or trades both domestically and internationally, the way that you can transact today, the cost of transactions has really come down significantly. And I think if you're looking to stimulate the economy of Europe, I think the focus should be on both businesses and governments looking to make that more effective, because that's where I think you'll get real growth.
Another question from the floor, perhaps?
Yeah, just say something.
Yeah, absolutely.
Actually, London is the biggest town of Cyprus as well, because there are more Cypriots living in London than my hometown, which is the biggest town in Cyprus.
Wow.
So that's a very good point. But I think
do you try to take advantage of that when you're here? Do they have votes?
Well, we're everywhere, but I think the main point about the labor force is this. I think we all know that we need a cheap labor force in order to be competitive. But there are two problems with this. I think one main problem is I think we can never be as competitive as other markets that have incredibly low labor costs, like China or India, or even closer to home like Turkey. Therefore, you need to have something else to provide. I mean, I think this is why Europe must increase its productivity, and we should, I think, follow the German model where its economy is technology-driven, quality-driven, as opposed to cost-driven when it comes to labor cost. The second problem, of course, is we all know we need foreign workers, and we do tend to invite them. But if it gets out of hand, you tend to get reaction out of your own population about the increasing number of immigration, which is a very complicated and complex problem, which I think you have to find a balance between the two.
We have time for a quick question from the floor. Maybe I'll finish up with a quick question on, from this crisis that we're seeing at the moment, is there opportunity to invest, and how would you go about taking advantage of that? Maybe taking your earlier points on the need to differentiate between economies. Does this crisis mean that's ever more important? Ken?
Well, sure it does. I think at the same time, in our sector in particular, we're fortunate that we're driven by basically the aging population. The real question is making sure that patients can get the products. For us, we just recently set up an affiliate in the Balkan region. We proved that 2 weeks ago. So, you know, we're looking at expanding this time. But again, it's all about your appetite for risk. And I think that's the key thing, is if you can have it and you can afford it, and you always have to assume going in that you're going to lose it. That's my decision. I always think about it. If I lost it, can I afford it?
I think from an investment point of view, I think this is a fabulous time to be investing. I think for me, this has been a fantastic opportunity because as an investor, you're generally looking at value. And I think there are some amazing opportunities where, generally speaking, valuations have come down quite significantly. And I think if we look at history, the economy, whether we like it or not, runs in cycles. And here we are, we're at the bottom of a particular cycle. And I think if we assume that this is a cycle which at some point, whether it's 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, will recover, I do think there are some really good opportunities, certainly as a private equity investor, when I'm looking to buy businesses. Today, the multiples that I'm likely to pay are probably half what they were a few years ago. Whether you're buying real estate, shares, companies, you know, of course you have to be careful and you've got to be cautious and you've got to understand risk very well. But I think if you are in that position, I don't think it's doom and gloom. I do think there's an opportunity that you can still make money in this current economic environment, despite there being some real, you know, crisis out there.
Which leads me to thank our panel, and please join me in thanking them. Thank you.